All right, there we go. All right, so current state group. So you have the link there from Donnie to open the document. And we can all just open that up and be in there together.
Can you, on mine, oh, there it is. Okay, I thought my chat disappeared when I moved in here, but it didn't. Okay, great.
It's weird. Sometimes it closes, but it's still there. When you go back in.
Got it.
That's a little trickery of the Zoom there. So the big news here, which I'll just say a little bit more about, is that our report is now integrated with the future state report. And this happened because as we started looking at the two of them side by side, we had written an executive summary for our report that was kind of an introduction to the whole process, right? And the future report was sort of like, do we need to repeat that? Or and we were like, well, no, not really. But what if they didn't read that and these were out of sequence? And the more we talked about it, the more we thought, like, actually, it'd be great to just have one introduction to the two things. And actually within the text to be able to pair like a current state statement with its paired future state statement, because if you aren't us and you're reading this, that's actually kind of what you want to see. Do you know what I mean? We know those connections. And so when we read one list, we imagine the other because we were in all these discussions. But for folks who aren't us, it just seemed like this would be more accessible. So I just wanted to share that rationale for having brought them together. The content of them didn't change at all in doing that. We just lined them up. And what was in the future state as a sort of introduction just has been removed. And we just changed the wording a little bit in the transition at the end of the executive summary to make clear that both things were there. So I don't know if people have thoughts about that. You feel okay about that or? Yeah. Okay, great. All right, well then let's get into the document itself. And I thought we'd give a little bit of time just to dig in and revisit, because I don't know how much time you had to read. I know we sent you a lot of materials and not a lot of days. This was a late breaking decision to integrate these two, so it slowed us down just a little in sending things out to you all. But why don't we take a couple of minutes and just everybody can read through here and see. I mean, to be honest, I feel like our group has kind of the easiest time of things tonight because we started working on ours earlier than everybody else, and it hasn't changed, in weeks now, really, except for this organizational change. But why don't we just I'll set a timer for like 3 minutes, and you can do a little bit of skimming and kind of, re-associate yourself with it, like refamiliarize yourself. I'm just going to set a timer. Boop-a-doop. There we go. Right, so that was about 3 minutes, which I know is certainly not long enough to like read this whole thing, but and we can take a little more time. We're actually going to consider as a group both of these documents now that they're one, right? Like, are there things in terms of the themes in either document where we want to offer some feedback? So the specific question again is, do the themes, both the Commonwealth-wide themes and those user-specific themes in the current state, do we think they describe the strengths of the system and the needs of those not yet well served? And in the future state, does it capture the sort of opportunity ahead of us and the aspirations that we have? And I think, if we could review this, really thinking about like, is there anything that doesn't feel accurate to our conversations? I think that's probably the most important thing to review for, or like, is something missing? We talked about it and I don't just see it here. Anybody have any thoughts or feedback on the new, current, and future state? And I'll take notes in our slides. None of you have to worry about that.
I think the current is what it needs to be. Mm-hmm. We're never going to be able to, I think, embrace and capture and encompass every single thing, because we know that there are issues and concerns and trends that we just haven't seen, that haven't, jumped out at us or haven't been identified. But I think for what we need to do to be able to interpret the future, I think it's where it needs to be.
Mm-hmm.
So from the perspective of someone who facilitated during, the coalition meetings across the state, who listened to the perspectives of folks and who heard their concerns, I think that the Commonwealth, the current themes, really hit the nail on the head. And also with the vision for the future, I think that they pair well together. As for, so I guess I've sort of scrolled down to look through the stakeholder themes, the family, and so on. And I think that they do a really good job as well. So yeah.
Great.
I really like the setup of having the current and the future side by side and then the profiles underneath. I think that just kind of captures the whole picture, and I think is a good decision than having them in two separate places. I think it shows where we are, where we want to go, and then the voices behind that drove those conversations and the themes that came out. So I think that's a really good move.
Great.
And I'll also add, not to get too emotional here, but after spending the past several months involved in this work, it really means a lot to see all of this work being brought together in this report. I'm just very, very thankful to see. I guess holistic is the word that I'm looking for. These current themes really are.
Mm.
I would just add, I agree with everything that's been said. I really like the juxtaposition of the current with the future state. I think it lends itself to conversations around how do we get from the current to the future, and what challenges might we run into along the way. So I like how they're paired together.
Great. Any other thoughts?
Yeah, that whole big statement is now gone because I was muted.
Oh, Penny, I didn't hear a word.
Well, what I was saying was because if we were to present this, if someone were to ask us about this, because of what this looks like now, I think we've managed to, it would have been really easy after the listening sessions and really disaggregating that, it would have been easy to fall into that abyss and say, there's nothing positive about Kentucky education, right? Just that superficial glance. Yeah. But I think what we found is that pattern and that happy medium. We know what the challenges are, but Gretchen, you keep using the word opportunity. If we don't look at it as we can do something about this work doesn't get done. So I think that if we feel that way, I think these documents demonstrate that that's how we feel and that the future is indeed the future. So I think people on the outside would appreciate that.
I'm glad you said it twice, Penny. Thank you.
I would also say that I think it's comprehensive enough that as we begin our local work, we should be able to see these things hold true in our local communities, and it'll be a nice launch pad for us to start those conversations about what do we want to prioritize, what rings true particularly in our context, and what do we value and hold on to that we want to prioritize and work on moving forward. So we don't have to recreate the wheel, right? So we have something that we can start with.
I'll agree. I think that the future state provides, it really leans on the firm foundation that we already have in Kentucky's public schools, and it empowers through its vision Kentucky's public schools to improve in a way that is feasible. And I also think that in its own right, it provides some flexibility as districts and as communities, be it the local learning laboratories and the work that they do, also local school districts and so on. It provides them with the flexibility to improve and reach this new vision in a way that best fits their community's needs.
Yeah, and I think in looking at having the future state next to the current state, I think as districts look through there, you know, it's almost, it makes me think of like a strategic plan, and I can go through here and see what components do I already have in place, even if the future state, and kind of get some wins from looking at that. Well, we already, you know, when I'm looking at one now about home visits and establishing those relationships and going, you know, some districts already are doing that. And so you can think, okay, we're moving into this in this spot, but oh, we're not doing so much in this other area. And it kind of gives it a way to chunk some things and to make some steps forward, even if they're small steps at first.
That makes me think, Michelle, too, that this also offers some support to the department, because one of the things a department can do inside a state, this was like my favorite thing when I was at the department in Colorado, is you can connect those people to one another, right? Like there are like bright spots in all different parts of this thing all over the state. And there are people really wanting to work on all of the parts of this, you know, around the state. And this I could see being really helpful actually for a Department of Education to think, you know, if this is some people's current state and they want this future state, but for some people, this future state is their current state, we could be putting them together, and they can maybe use this even to do a little bit of feedback and inventorying to figure out where some good pairings might be, which is cool. Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, why don't we shift to talking about the guidebook? So we're going to review the guidebook when we're together right now too. We're leaving the learning agenda because it's the most unfamiliar to those of us who are not in that group. And so there's like a lot more thinking probably to be done about that one. So we're going to do some work together as a whole group about that. But the guidebook is something that we also want to get everybody's eyes on. I'll just remind you of the purpose of this. So the local laboratories of learning, the L3 districts, are forming their local teams now. So they have a district leader who's like leading this project, and they've identified a community partner to be their co-lead on their local endeavor. And they are going to start they are actually in the process right now, forming their local coalitions, following methods that are very similar to what we use to form this coalition that we're all a part of here. And so the guidebook helps provide them with some background about how to do that, but then also tries to offer them some insights about what we've learned from working together about how to work together well, and how to work together in a way that doesn't just invite maybe somebody who isn't always invited to the table at the beginning, but attends to trying to be connected to one another and hearing from one another and learning from one another all through the process. And so that's the sort of purpose of this guidebook, is that it's a set of resources for those L3 communities, which we will continue to build onto, actually, just to be clear. The document we just looked at is probably going to be just like that for a pretty good period of time. Like, that's pretty settled document. This guidebook, as we continue to work with the first group of L3 districts this fall, we're going to continue to build this guidebook so we have an even stronger resource for the second group of districts who will begin this work in the spring. So when we do our fist to 5 voting on the guidebook today, it's not that we're like sort of signing off on a final product so much as we're saying, I think this does capture some learning that we have about how to do this well. And it looks like it's setting those local teams up for success, knowing that it's going to continue to evolve and get even stronger as they do their own work. So why don't we do the same kind of thing here? And maybe I'll give a little bit more time for us here. Oh, actually, maybe I can't give us more time. It says we only have 3 minutes left. Yeah, Brian.
It took me a while to scan. I think the structure is really really nice, and the narratives are just brilliant in bringing out the details in a way that is really rich to help inform the discussions. The one thing I was just musing over is I think the different sections of stakeholder themes, they don't work together, and the school leader theme in particular is, I think, quite weak compared to the others. So it's a little late to bolster them, but if you said if we put them side by side and said, how are these going to work together? That part of the coherence, I don't think is there yet.
Mm-hmm. You know, Brian, one thing we could do about that is we could flag that as an area for continued learning with the L3s. Certainly, we're going to have an opportunity to be a lot closer to a number of school leaders in particular in that work. Would you like me to make a note about that?
Yeah, I don't think this is I think the whole idea about continuing coalitions is that this wasn't a finished work. I think just telling people there were a lot of very good people who've worked in the summer. This is what we have, you know, just build on it. Don't say that it's not close-ended. It's you continue to create with it. I think that's a really good way to frame it.
Okay. So the note I made, Brian, is not a revision for today, but going forward, and I'll make a little parenthetical note like L3 work. It would be good to hear more from school leaders so their section is as robust as the others.
And that might just be an orientation to tell other audiences as well.
Yeah.
This is a framework and a foundation for building on. It's not supposed to be the final part, like make sure you check off every box and you're done. So yeah, I think that never was the intent anyway, but make sure it's really clear.
Yep.
So here's a devil's advocate question. When you look at local partnering and looking at district stakeholders and different levels, how have, if at all, they factored in SBDMs? Because when Brian talks about school level, I mean, these, you know, SBDM schools have a lot of autonomy. Mm-hmm. So how does this factor in at all if it's been discussed or considered?
The local, those L3 districts that are taking this work forward kind of first this fall, they have had some discussions about that and about what kind of local group they want to form and how they want that to relate to those folks and other things that they might have, right? Like they were having conversations about, you know, the PTAs and stuff like that too, right? About where they might want to make sure that they have members of those groups participating in their coalition, right? So that they are helping, right, with figuring out what to do. So there, I do know it's come up in their conversations about forming those groups. I haven't heard more than that on that topic, but I have heard that. Yeah.
Yeah, 5 more minutes. That's good.
5 minutes. That is good. Should we take a couple minutes and take a look at the guidebook? And you know, you are going to be asked when we get back to the full session to testify votes on all these documents. So, you know, we hope you had good time to review, but also, as Brian said, the testify vote isn't like, is it done for all time? Shall we etch it in stone? It is, shall we send it on, right? Shall we send it on to the L3 communities? Should we begin sharing it more publicly? So hopefully that helps a little with the frame. But yeah, let's take just a couple minutes and scroll through the guidebook. You'll see that Wallace is, you're famous, Caleb. You're quoted in there. Bottom of page 4 if you want to look for Caleb's quote.
I like the stakeholder engagement planning, the things to consider.
Mm-hmm.
Pretty comprehensive.
Good.
Christian, I thought the process that was done was really effective, and the guidebook is a you know, wonderful resource to help local labs of learning and the local coalitions go through that. I guess I had 2 thoughts. One was I think the CIE did most of the work in getting things to go from what the committees and we did, on the Padlets and things like that. And if there's, I don't know if there's enough support to help whoever's doing that at the local level actually do that. So if there's some type of support, and I think not just a document, but if there's some type of real live people, I think that will help people be more successful. I was just thinking about, now that I read these profiles, they are so elegant, and I'm sure someone spent a lot of time refining. So there may be some resources that enable the summer work to happen that will be necessary in addition to the guide. I think the guidebook lays out the process really well. I'm just wondering whether people were going to be able to do it.
Yeah, so they are going to have a lot of facilitation support.
Okay, great.
But I will say we are still trying to figure out how to make sure that we can deliver on that well, given a number of oddball constraints of, COVID, et cetera. Like there's some things going on with that, but the plan, I'll just tell you at a high level, is that there will be some design sessions that actually we facilitate virtually, just like we did the coalition, so that everybody can have access and we can facilitate directly. And then teams will go into breakout rooms. And we think we have enough of us to be able to go around to those breakout rooms and be supportive. And then we do have a couple folks locally who are going to be able to engage in person with teams from time to time through the process, folks at the department, and also Karen, who's over at the Next Gen Leadership Center at the university. So we do have some of that support, but I think you're right. It's going to be critical. And I think we're going to have to really be responsive in the support that we provide to make sure everybody really gets the help they need with that. Some of those key sort of transition points in the work in particular. Yeah, it's a really point well taken, Brian.
One thing I want to note is that when you'll see these like bolded headlines that are at the top of the themes on pages 4 and 5, we realized that when we were working on the learning agenda, so the big questions, kind of the big themes that a district might want to work on, it was helpful as we were kind of working through that to frame those headlines as a little bit of the current state and then a little bit of the aspiration. So each of them have a flavor of that. So for example, know people as more than statistics and involve them in inquiry about inequities. There's used to be kind of a less of this, please do less of this, and please do more of something else.
So Donnie, one area I'm looking at a theme 7. I'm looking at the future state bolded language. So the terminology around creating conditions where everyone can fail. And I'm just wondering if when we say fail, are we really talking about trial and error versus, actual wholesale? Because to me, trial and error means we can mess up, but we circle back and we try it again. Versus, so this is the teacher / coach in me who says failure is only failure when you stop trying, right? So I'm wondering if language around creating conditions where we can celebrate trial and error, something to that effect, would be more effective language based on what I think we mean. So that's my thought.
Yeah, this is Houston Barber. I agree with that. I think that kind of language is just something that can have a negative connotation. So if there's a way to maybe avoid that language, even though I understand it and get it, but I think it fits well. And maybe it's just take risk.
Yeah.
Can take an environment to take risk.
I like Houston's choice of taking risk even over trial and error, frankly.
I think one thing I'm wondering is if take risks and make mistakes might help, because I think there's when I was reading over some of the themes, and people are afraid to even be caught making a mistake. This is kind of true of everybody, right? Like when dealing with challenges at the school level or teachers in a classroom, like making mistakes in front of kids. I definitely resonate with what you're saying about failure, but I wonder if take risks and make mistakes might be okay.
And I'm hearing what you say, Donnie, and then that's where I do like the language around trial and error then, right? Because again, trial and error, that's, as a former teacher, that's education language, right? That's what we do in terms of laboratory procedures, right? Trial and error is a part of the process. So if you're speaking to educators through this language, trial and error makes sense.
Okay, so just capturing that, it'd be create conditions where everyone can take risks. Where would the trial and error fit in?
So when I was originally thinking about it, let me open it up and look at it on my screen. So if it looks like I'm not engaging in the Zoom, I promise you I am.
We trust you.
So when I was,
we trust you.
I was thinking something to the effect of create conditions where trial and error are celebrated, and we can improve by learning from one another instead of competing. So grammatically, that's what I was thinking. But again, I wasn't thinking about the language of taking risks, making mistakes. I was thinking of trial and error in particular. So like that would be leaving out that component. But that's how I was thinking about rewording it, if I could reword it any way that I would like.
What do people think about that suggestion? I'm trying to capture it. I'm not sure I did a very good job yet.
Maybe Donnie, I think somewhere in there, and I'm not exactly the best way to wordsmith this. What I'm hearing is without the fear of failure.
Mm-hmm.
Right now in the current situation, if you look at the current situation, there is such a fear of failure. So is there somewhere in there, it's like instead of competing or without the fear of failure, but still yet, whereas failure is positive and we can learn from it. I mean, that's what I'm kind of hearing a little bit. Maybe I'm off on that, but we want to be able to boldly try new things, take risks without a failure. But at the same time, we want to learn from that mistake, if you will. And again, I'm not good on the wordsmith. Any suggestion there would be great appreciated. But that's what I'm hearing. Maybe I'm off on that. Houston, would you agree with that? How about you, Mr. Cummings? Is that what you're hearing, or is what you're kind of get across, or am I a little off on that?
No, Dr. Fletcher, I agree with you. As I'm looking at what Donnie has captured, I like what's captured here. I would not want to lose the competition language either. So I'm almost wondering if it would make sense to, as we are looking at kind of completing this theme as it gets longer and longer. Create conditions where trial and error is celebrated. Everyone can take risk and improve by learning from one another without fear of failure or focusing on competition, something to that effect, because I think that that's a big part of it as well. So it's not just the fear of failing, it's also the focus on competition. And so we have to do it before this district does it. I think that those components, like that's what would want to eliminate from the L3 academies.
I originally had them down to fewer than 15 words per theme. or 15 or less. And so it's okay, I think, because I think I think the most important piece here is that the word failure or fail was not right. This is embedding trial and error, taking risks without, and still holding on to failure without centering on it. And we're still holding on to the competition part. Is there any place where we could trim it at all to make it not try to say everything, but try to say enough?
Donnie, I don't know if you saw Lou's in the chat.
It's still 17 or 18 words though, Donnie. I'm sorry.
You know, I'm a margin of error kind of guy. So if it's plus or minus, you know, I'm okay with that. So Lou's suggestion is create conditions where everyone feels safe to take intellectual risks, make mistakes, and improve by learning from one another instead of competing.
I would agree with that. That sounds good.
She's board chair for a reason.
She's good with the words.
Just trying to capture the comments that I've heard without losing the original sentiment.
Okay. Now, Travis, one of the things that thank you, Phoenix. I appreciate that weighing in there. One of the things that we were sort of going for was just reading from your comments in the original document was like a charge, a charge to think differently. How does this feel?
First of all, let me apologize for being late. Got my times mixed up, so apologies for that. Yeah, I like it.
One of the litmus tests that you could imagine for these is if you had a couple of these themes that you were focusing in on your L3 work. Would these feel like a call to action? Would they feel like a provocation? Would they feel like a clear synopsis for your board of where this is trying to go?
We must be at a good spot, Donnie. It's all quiet.
All right.
I think it's pretty solid. I mean, I like what was captured. I think you could probably go and wordsmith a lot of things, but it brings it out. And I'm thinking about how our board would respond to other boards. And Lou did a good job of capturing that all together.
Beautiful. Okay. All right. I think we feel pretty good about that. What will happen is we're going to go back to the room now with that, and then people will make that suggestion in real time in the document, and people will confirm it moving forward. Okay. Alrighty. Any other suggestions on the future state pieces?
Donnie, probably the only thing that makes me kind of bristle a little bit, if you will, is to go from random acts of improvement to common visions, deep partnerships, and shared responsibility. I don't feel like that for the most part, the school systems in our current state I don't really feel like there's random acts of improvement. I think they're very intentional, very well thought out, but maybe the focus is a little different. You know, what are we defining as improvement? I don't have a better choice of words, but when I first read that one, I was like, okay, you know, there's been a lot of hard work done to get to where we are in Kentucky. So, and maybe I just read that wrong. Maybe I'm a little off, but that go from random acts of improvement, I don't think that fully describes where we are. I think that we're very intentional in 95% of our districts, but random acts seems a little bit, I don't know if that really describes the current state. Now,
Robbie, I wonder if it's not more about districts having to chase others, perhaps policy level improvement initiatives, and it feels that the randomness begins to set in when it's like, okay, what's the comprehensive planning expectation du jour or something. I think maybe some of the fatigue from chasing different goals might be
That
what
makes
was
sense.
reflected.
So I hear like a churn sentiment there, right? Like that strategies churn and change, and it causes a little bit of like a angst.
So Donnie, you use the word strategies, and like if I was thinking about wordsmithing, would something like go from strategies that feel disjointed to common visions, deep partnership, shared responsibility? Like part of it too is that the sentiment around random acts of improvement, or even that sentiment of feeling disjointed, right? That's definitive perspective based on the audience that has created the current state document, right? So for someone like Dr. Fletcher, who's clearly on the inside, it's not going to feel random. It doesn't feel disjointed. I'm thinking about someone who might have been in my space as a community member, as we talked about, you know, better opportunities for communication. It might have felt like disjointed for someone like me who's in the community space versus someone who's on the inside. And so I'm wondering how to capture that sentiment without causing our education partners to bristle. Because as a former educator, I agree with that sentiment that Dr. Fletcher expressed. Like that would cause me to bristle to say, oh, this work that we've done before, like there was passion around that work as well. And there was a linear nature to that work as well. Maybe we could have more effectively communicated, you know, point A to point B. So I don't know how to capture that sentiment necessarily, but the idea of disjointed strategies or something to that effect, or strategies that feel disjointed, because maybe they weren't, but that's the way that they felt or they landed on a particular audience. I don't know.
Is the goal here in that statement, was it to capture the feelings of the local community, the perception of stakeholders within your community feel like those things are random, the acts of improvement?
Yeah.
Is that across the state, trying to embody the feeling of across the state, it appears random?
Yeah, I think it's a great question of whose perspective that's meant to capture.
And Donnie, the current state says stakeholders. Stakeholders believe that everyone is trying, everyone is working hard, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, so I mean, I guess I certainly understand what we're talking about reading that and feeling that angst around that statement, but I do believe there's perceptions, which I think is what Lou was communicating, that it is random because it's like we try this thing for a while and then we go try something else for a while, then we try something else for a while. So I think the perception is that it is random sometimes, and maybe that's just a different perspective. I mean, I feel like that sometimes, to be honest with you. As strategic as I try to be in our work, I think the perception is sometimes around that.
Well, it may be to go from perceptions of random acts of improvement to common visions. So just maybe go from perceptions of random acts.
The exact same thing.
Yeah.
I had the same thought.
Yeah. And you guys all have to do is say proficiency by 2020, right? When I was still superintendent, that's what we were all focused on. That's what we were geared on. And then in 2016 or 17, whatever the year was, that was no longer the improvement goal for lots of good reasons. I'm not criticizing the change, but it did feel like whiplash for a lot of people.
Yep. I really like
agree. Agree.
Yeah, and I mean, I love the latter part of that, in that it's through the vision and deep partnership that we can really target a focus and strategy around that is anchors us, right, moving forward. And so to me, it resonates to some degree. And so I would just argue a different perspective.
And adding perceptions there, I think really adds a deep level of empathy for the experiences that Robbie was talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. Robbie, thank you for bringing it up, and thank you to everybody who voiced the felt feelings of other groups and how that perception shapes this theme. I think it's in a really good spot. Okay, do we agree? Does that feel all right? Good deal. Okay. All right. We have just a couple more minutes. Is there any burning changes that feel like you wouldn't be able to stand behind it if it said X, or you'd feel extra excited if it said Y?
Well, I do want to say something. So I made some suggestions. I really love number 10. Don't go back to normal. Embrace the hard questions and answer them as a united community. I love that. I think that we don't want back to normal. I don't. I hope everybody doesn't. But again, I really want to say that is awesome. So give a big 2 thumbs up on that one.
Well, Dr. Fletcher, I love ending on a high note. Sorry, my daughter is leaving for dance class. All right. Otherwise, it's feeling good.
"26 whole seconds to spare."
Beautiful. Well, so I mean, all of you really weighed in to many parts of this process, and I just want to appreciate that. And so thank you for all of the work now, before and now.
Record? Okay, there you go. Good. Sarah, do you also have permission to share screen?
We can certainly find out. How do we look?
Okay, awesome. Looks great. Yeah, thank you for doing that. So, y'all, hopefully this is looking a little better. This thing's been under construction for a couple weeks now, and appreciate your good, thoughtful edits on the first couple around. Okay, thanks, Jennifer. We see your note about driving. Please be careful. We can listen to your feedback. Don't worry about trying to look at anything. So appreciate your thoughtful edits and comments already on this document. We have introduced this document to the local labs of learning just very pulled it up on the screen and said, this is a thing, this will be coming your way for a support. But just as a reminder, this is intended to be a document that is a support for districts who are leading their own local levels of innovation related to assessment and accountability. So I think it probably makes sense to give you a few minutes to kind of look at it and dive back into it before we start talking about it. So do we want to just be quiet and take the document in for a few minutes and look it over quickly? Does that make sense for a way to proceed?
Do you want us to look at it separately, Karen, or do you all kind of want to scroll and look at it together? Do you want us to?
I tell you, I mean, I don't have a preference either way. What I can do is walk you through sort of the organization of the document at a high level and then give you all a chance to dig in. What about that?
Sounds good to me.
Okay. All right. Sarah, our driver, scrolling us down there. So this book has been divided into 3 sections. The first section is really the background of the project. So like what happened at the state level, what's the coalition, what's the purpose of it, a little intro from Dr. Glass, a little intro about the purpose of the guidebook and the use of it. So the first section is really sort of background and context for anybody who's just sort of picking this up cold. The second section is intended to be processed resources for districts. So if the first question is, what is our work together? The second section is really guided by how can we work together? So the first thing the districts are doing is basically assembling their teams, their own little local coalitions. So the first section of first part of section 2 is around team composition, how to do that, how to find the people to be on the team, how to recruit folks, what about an application, that sort of thing. The next part is really going to be diving into, and this is far from being done now, but a design thinking process that the districts are going to go through to develop their prototypes, and then some information about engagement and communication. And then the third section is really an appendix. So it'll be sort of smaller items that are intended to just support the work and mainly support section 2 of this document. So that's the super high level. And you can see this is not graphically designed at all yet. This is just like, you know, sort of the content that's in there now, including some placeholders for some important things to be fleshed out later. But thinking about our task at hand here, what are basically the big edits? What are the big things that you think are missing? What are some most important things we need to make sure we include in here for districts? What's been helpful from our coalition experience here for this document? So I guess I would sort of stop talking there and say, you know, that's the high level overview of the doc. If you all want to take a few minutes sort of on your own just to dig into it a little bit. Just trying to, I know lots of us are educators in here, but just trying to keep yourself away from small copy edits and wordsmithing, trying to keep to the big pictures.
Erin, do you want to, maybe we suggest just chunking into those 3 sections and kind of zooming in on section 1, and then we can break that down?
Sure. Yeah, that's a great idea, Sarah. All right, so let's just focus our attention on section 1 right now. Good idea.
Is there anyone reliant on me right now in my screen sharing? So I may stop sharing just so you all can open the document on your own screen.
I don't see any real big edits for that first section. I think it's a good summary of what we did. I had an initial meeting as local laboratory learning just with my community co-leader this week. And because he missed our meeting last week, and I used this section. He watched the recording, but I used this section to try to give him context, and because he's not an educator, you know, at all. So it was helpful for that. So, I've kind of put it into practice just to kind of say, here's what we've done so far. So that it was helpful.
It's already working.
I'm so glad Susan said that, because that was going to be my first question is, could we picture someone who has not heard of this at all understanding what we're doing here out of this section? So that's great to know.
Mm-hmm. That is a great lens to put on this thing. Could someone who's not an educator pick this up and at least, make some kind of sense out of it? That's a great test for, kind of de-jargoning it and making it accessible. So that's a good lens to put on it. I thought about that, but that's good.
It probably won't stand alone in doing that, but it will be a support. Like, I didn't have to come up with all of that. The meat, I could use that as the intro and then answer his questions, give feedback, because there's still so much. Like, I went all the way back to what is assessment and what is accountability. I mean, that's, we had to start there.
Do you think this document needs any of that? Like, what is the current sort of even rough high level of what is the current state of assessment and accountability, since our intent is to rethink it? Do you think this document needs that kind of background?
Maybe in that first section, like, I was like very simply saying assessment is the test, those things, and then accountability is at the federal level. I mean, I had to go all the way up to see, and then assessment fits into accountability this way. So it may not hurt to have something in there.
Very helpful coming from a parent's point of view, because I find when I look at most things that I want, and it just seems like, just to give you one, this doesn't have anything to do with you guys or with the thing, but like on Twitter, somebody was talking about something to do with politics, and they said, I guess that we need to explain it like we're talking to kindergartners. And I was like, yes, please. Because that's the way I feel like when I'm looking at most documents. And because when people know what they're talking about, they tend to use shortcuts and acronyms that the average person isn't used to. And so, and I know when I first started with the coalition, that's how I felt the first, meeting. I was like, okay, I don't know what most of the stuff means. And I felt like I was playing catch up pretty much the whole time. So I think that would be a great idea. Start with the basics. I mean, I don't think anybody's going to be offended. And that's just my opinion.
Helpful.
I agree. I think that if you wanted to format it in like an FAQ type of way, that way the descriptions don't get too lengthy. You just have a couple questions like, what is assessment? What is accountability? Where does Kentucky stand on that currently? I know we have like the current and future education reports, but that's kind of long. If we just had like a solid paragraph max of information about Kentucky's assessment and accountability, like relationship, along with just generally defining those terms, that might be helpful.
One thing that I find helpful, like, I'm somebody who, when I'm looking for information, I want like straight to the point. But when I'm explaining to somebody, I tend to go way overboard and over explaining. So I do the opposite of what I'm looking for. And there's a couple of documents I found that have like the short summary. And then if you want to go into more detail, then you can click on something else. But I find that very helpful.
Okay. Good.
I'll comment as well, just I know as a recording note so that I don't lose it either. We have Dr. Thomas Tucker and Dr. Damian Sweeney at KDE who have been working specifically on diversity, equity, and inclusion. So I think when Nora mentions defining equity and diversity within a KDE context, I think that's very helpful as well, and a good place for them to plug in those efforts and resources into the guidebook.
Equity and diversity.
One more thought on this, and I'll be quiet, is that I know that when I have difficulty trying to understand what people are trying to say in some of these documents, and English is my only language, I often say that I can't even speak that properly, but when you think of somebody with their English isn't their first language, so just try to keep it simple for people like me and other people that English is their second language.
All right, so are we going to put this in other languages? Because I remember if we're going to invite members of our coalition from underrepresented groups, that's one of mine who mostly Spanish speaking. I may need it in Spanish.
Mm-hmm.
That's a valid point, Susan. I think it speaks to the nature of the, being radically inclusive.
Right.
Yep.
I mean, there are other languages too. So I'm not sure of all of the different laboratory of learning districts, but there are some, like we have other languages, but those are, one or two families. Most of our students speak Spanish, or the parents speak Spanish as a native language. So you may need to look at that.
Mm-hmm.
I think that jumps ahead a little into section 2, Karen, but I'm assuming you're taking notes. Are you taking notes? Should I take notes? Okay, I figured you were. We may just, while Susan has that up there, we may consider adding in some kind of note of support or design around when the local labs are designing to consider the language needs or having, if we're meeting virtually, how are they going to accommodate for the visually or hearing impaired?
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Oh yeah. Gosh. Yeah. Good. Okay. Yeah. I've got that note. Just so far, what I've got on our notes, I'm capturing it on slide number 8 here. I got overall translating into other languages, section 1, adding a high level overview of assessment and accountability as a current state moment, and I just put some ideas, maybe a call out box or hyperlink to a deeper version or less than a paragraph or an FAQ, just some, quick take on that so people have a current state sense. Those are the 2 big notes I have, and then I have the other Nora's recommendations on adding to the glossary, trying to capture all those terms, and I'm actually putting those in the guidebook now. Directly in the guidebook. So not defined yet, but just adding a list of terms we need to make sure we put in here for folks. Good. Okay, so we're good with section 1. All right, right on. So
I said before, I was going to say one more thing, but just whenever possible, just use plain, simple language.
Yep. Yeah, I think we should keep that as a lens, really, for this entire thing. Okay, so that, and as we move to section 2, just know that section 2 is sort of the more meaty part of the document. We're looking for big ideas of what would be helpful to the districts. So not the tiny wordsmithing at this point, although we should come back and do that, but big ideas of what would be helpful to the districts. So thinking back over our own coalition experience, what are things that helped us? So let's spend a few minutes digging into section 2 and think about what might help a local district.
Dr. Hatchett, I see that you're just joining us. I don't want to interrupt. We are in, oh, you're muted. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I was in between stuff. I just left the school, and then it's 8th grade night, and there's 3 different ball games. So I'm gonna, and the first one started. So I'm gonna have to bounce out eventually because I'm trying to catch everything and be at the meeting. So okay.
We appreciate you being here for as long as you can. In the chat, I'm posting the co-creation guide. That's what we're working in right now. We're on section 2, which is specifically relevant to the L3 districts and that coalition formation. So our goal right now is just to look through and see any high level edits, substantial context edits that you think might be necessary.
In section 2, okay, how we can work together?
Yes.
Okay.
And we're just taking time right now to look over it, and then we'll talk here in a moment about what we
think. What does L3 mean?
Local labs.
Okay.
One of the things I found helpful in this section was that quick start was perfect. That we referred to that the other day, so that was really good. One thing I would ask, I wonder if this would meet the threshold for an edit. What is lacking a little bit is a overview. Like there's the design thinking graphic, and people who do design thinking know what that means. And so what I really liked was in that in the video that Gretchen did, the overview that she sent us to watch before tonight, there is an infographic, and it's 2 slides that show the whole process from beginning to end for laboratories of learning. And if we could put that in there so that people could see the big picture of the process, and not just, the phases of design thinking, but what are those phases, then we could find yourself in there. And even if you even broke it apart, like here's the whole big picture, but quick start, you're at phase 1. And then when you start to do empathy, here we are now. So like, again, I had to explain to my community person, like what this whole process was, because he was going to recruit some members of the community. He said, I don't even know how to explain what we're doing, or, what the whole process is. So I'm not sure how to recruit. So I think seeing the infographics helped me throughout the coalition work, when I could see the big picture and find where I was in that big picture, to give me context.
One note that I have about this section, because it is all about recruitment, I am not seeing like enough mention of students and including students in this. That could be down to like the language level, but overall it's the larger idea. And while a lot of us here would think to include students, that's not necessarily everybody's mindset. So I think that just generally including more language around that, because when you hear community stakeholders, you don't always think of students first, or education stakeholders, you don't think of students first. So that could slip a lot of people's minds, and I think it'd be beneficial to include.
That's good.
Yep. These are both good ideas.
I think also, sorry, I'm a little hoarse from teaching with a mask on. I think also to include all the English language learners that we might hope to and I shouldn't say English language learners, their families, the community, the stakeholders that would be great at representing them. I tried to open the form and it's closed. I'm sure it's because it's one that we've used before or something, but just be careful what demographic information you ask for, because if you ask for too much, it will cut out a chunk of people. But they could be really good, highly qualified people that I work with every day that are great in the classroom and stuff, but we have to, at our district, we have a high population of Spanish-speaking parents that work really well with us, but we have to be careful when we recruit them and even get them permission to work in the classroom, what information we collect, if that is clear, but not saying too much on. Maybe even a graphic there that shows a balance of all the stakeholders. That's really like in your face. Like it's not just 3/4 teachers or 3/4 administrators, but we want a good balance. This coalition has been a good balance of all stakeholders from the top down, and everybody has had active engagement. Right now, as a parent has spoke, a student has spoke more than anyone else. But maybe if you had a little graphic to where it's very obvious that we want an equal amount of representation of all stakeholders. I don't know, something like that.
Helpful. I think we're going to get the hook here in like 2 or 3 minutes. So just as a word, like we don't have to just be limited to this amount of time just right now. If you think of other, even small things later on, just put your comments right in the document like we did before. So, you know, it's hard to sometimes do things right in the moment. So small comments, but we just want to try to get the big ones out of the way now because we're going to come to consensus on those things. You all have editing rights, right, to put comments in?
Yes, I think, yeah, they're suggesting, yes.
I don't think that I do, because I was trying to go in and make some changes before, and he wasn't able to do anything with it. I could just read it. I haven't checked it. I had to go back and look. It's been a while since I've.
Okay. Any other big things jumping out?
I guess one other lens, I know we've talked about if we were presenting this to folks who've never heard of this process in that first section, another lens you might approach this section specifically is, well, I was gonna say it's groups, districts who are not yet involved in this process. They'll be getting this tool when they just start the whole process. They won't necessarily have these supports that we have right now going through it initially, but something just that lens to see, could a district pick this up off the ground with this tool?